Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Lisa Haver, who will discuss with us last week's school board confirmation hearing. And Denise and I will discuss yesterday's election results in the second half of the show. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And we had a very odd day today. And Lisa's here. Lisa, there you are. Hello.
Hey, Larry and Denise. Good to be here.
It's good to see you. So why don't we just jump right into it? We have a lot to talk about with the school board nominations. But before we get into what happened last week, Lisa, can you just walk us through kind of what the school board does and how those people are chosen?
The school board, which was reestablished in 2018 after a 17-year reign by the School Reform Commission, is made up of 9 members. All 9 of those members are chosen by the mayor. In this case, of course, Mayor Sherrell Parker. And the mayor has control over the school district. It's not like legally a part of the executive branch of the city. But the control over the nominees comes with the mayor choosing 9 nominees and then council confirming those 9 nominees. And then they are sworn in. What the Board of Education is the governing body of the school district of Philadelphia. They are supposed to be, by home rule charter, an independent board. And I want to stress again, they're not part of the executive branch of the city. They're not part of the city government. The Board of Education oversees a, right now, $4.5 billion annual budget. And of course, they set policy for the schools. They choose a superintendent. They negotiate labor contracts. And of course, they make decisions which, affect everybody in the city, whether you have children in the schools or not, or you work for the school, affects everybody in the city.
And they are not paid, or if they are, it's a nominal fee.
They're not paid. No school district, every school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is, all those members are volunteers. We have all unpaid boards.
So getting into this year now, Mayor Parker appoints a committee who will review and vet candidates. We've spoken about that process,
right,
and how that went. And then 27 names are released. And from those 27, 9 are their nominations are sent to city council.
I'll just say 27 names. I believe they are released. I was going to correct you, but I think you're right. The panel comes up with 27 names, and those go to the mayor, and that out of that she picks 9, and those are the names that go to city council. Yeah.
So all 3 of us last week were at that hearing Friday afternoon into Friday evening.
Yeah.
So what I'll do, because both of you wrote pieces about that touched on this at least. So let's get right into what happened at that hearing.
Let me say what was supposed to happen. That hearing, and I've been to all of them, all hearings for every nominee since 2018. It is supposed to be a hearing for the public to witness, attend, or even testify at, to make sure that the mayor's nominees are fit to serve in that position, get an idea of what their experience is, what their priorities are, what their vision for education is. It's not like the public has a whole lot to say because that whole thing has passed, but it is at least one time for the public to hear about the nominees and testify and have something to say. That is not what happened on Friday. What happened on Friday was what happened on Friday was what we witnessed was the outcome of very sustained lobbying by charter administrators and lobbyists and PR people. That is what we saw, and it was pretty shocking to see what was supposed to happen to give the people of the city who had been shut out of that entire selection process, to give them at least some opportunity to see, okay, who's coming in to run our children's schools. It turned into, I am really trying to make my language neutral, but it was an opportunity for people who are running the city's charter schools and lobbying for those operators. It was a show of strength. It was a show of muscle to say we're going to set this agenda. And I think in the 7 hours that we were there at that hearing, I think I heard the names of 2 Philadelphia public schools. And almost all of the rest of it was about this narrative that the present Board of Education has been very unfair to charters. I want to just explain that when the mayor picked her 9 nominees, 4 are incumbents, including the president, Reginald Streeter. So she picked 4 of the present 9. And so there are 5 nominees that most people don't know who they are. And as somebody who goes to all the board meetings and very involved in this, I did not know who any of them were. So we should have really been focusing on, yes, the past performance of the school board and what their priorities need to be going into this new session, and who these 5 people are and what their priorities, what is their vision. We did not get that. We had city council people, and I think I said this in my commentary, they weren't looking at, a report and saying, it says here this, and this data shows this. They were clearly repeating what they had been told by charter operators who propel this narrative that they're being treated unfairly. That is what that 7-hour hearing devolved into. There was, as somebody, again, who goes to all the board meetings and hears what parents talk about, what students come and talk about, students come and they will talk about the condition of their schools, or, needing more mental health care, needing more counselors, parents who come and talk about leveling, all kinds of issues. Those issues were not discussed.
No, you're absolutely right. 90% of it, and that may even be low, was about charter schools. You didn't hear much about librarians, nurses. You had a couple questions. I think Councilmember Harity brought up mental health workers, those kind, and you didn't hear anything about music programs, art programs, any of those things.
Those words were said in passing. There were 2 sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The entire first session was about charter schools. Most of the second session was about charter schools. And then there were a few questions or comments in passing about art and music and restoring school librarians. But really, there was not what I call any kind of discussion about those things with the nominees.
And Denise, now, what was your? Oh, go ahead, Denise.
I was going to say what I found most interesting about that entire hearing was how useless it felt after a while, because we kept going back to the same point. Yeah. Now, and this will probably put some of this into context what I'm about to say next. On Thursday, after Thursday's council session, I came late because I had a prior engagement, but I was walking around City Hall, just, where the council offices were. I was walking around, trying to do various things. Like I was trying to find out if we could get into the SEPTA briefing that they were going to have for council. So I'm walking around the 5th floor where, some of the council offices are. And I saw a friend of mine who just happens to be a charter school lobbyist. And he was there with two charter school officials, and they were going into one of the council people's office. And I'm like, okay, I haven't seen that in a very long time. And I remembered the last time I saw it. It was when the charter school law was being produced in the first place. I think that because I've been doing what I do for as long as I've done it, I remember when the charter school law was created. And that was another thing that kind of fascinated me about this hearing, is you had all of these people coming up talking about how charter schools are being treated unfairly. But when you look at the charter school law, the law is doing what it's supposed to. The law, as it was originally written, the whole idea behind school reform was to give us better schools using and use data as our North Star, data, test scores, attendance, those kinds of things. Those were supposed to be our North Star when it came to this.
All of this, I'm sorry.
Right. This was
all of this came under No Child Left Behind.
Right.
This was going on. Yeah, this was going on all over Philly, Detroit, Chicago, this quote unquote school reform. And, you remember it and I remember it. I mean, I was at all these meetings in person. So try to remind people that when we were sitting there and hearing the charter companies sell themselves in Philly to the School Reform Commission, it was, we are going to do a better job. The public schools are failing children. We are going to do a better job, and we're going to do it because we're going to be innovative and we're going to be flexible, and we're not going to have to deal with those unions and all that stuff. And that's how they sold it. And charters get, in this city, they get 5-year terms. Now, my question would be, okay, you didn't do that. I mean, public schools, quick look at the data, consistently outperform charter schools. Right. So at what point do you say we failed? And I'll tell you, one school did this. If you remember the school that was called CHAD, it was architecture and design. Mm-hmm. Those guys at CHAD, about maybe 3 years ago, said, we wanted to have this special school and we thought we could do it. And, we thought as architects, we'd have something that we could teach these kids, and we really wanted to, but this isn't working. And we realized it's not working, so we're going to close. Okay, thank you. There are many, many schools that are not performing up to standards, and those standards are about as lax as you can get. And that charter performance framework about 5 years ago, there were meetings that we found out about. When I say we, the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, we found out about afterwards, story in WHYY, that the charter people were invited to meetings at the district, a series of meetings that went on for weeks. Part of what they were doing was revising their own performance framework. So when we're hearing, and now it's being mouthed by city council people, that the evaluation system is unfair. I'm like, well, you helped to create that framework. And even that, which became much more lax, you're still not able to perform. How many times are you going to blame somebody else? The other part of this that was just counter to the truth that we have seen is there is a charter schools office, in the school district. The charter operators have complete access to them, picking up the phone, calling them up to that office every single business day. The board itself has, we have complained about this and we have protested about this. The Board of Education has consistently renewed 5-year renewal of schools that are not meeting standards. They're not meeting academic standards or financial or organization, and sometimes all three. They are still being renewed. So when you say, what is this unfairness? What is it that you're talking about? Because consistently, charter schools that fail to meet standards are being renewed. Now, is that fair to the operators? Maybe. I know it's not fair to the children and the families who were told this school will definitely be better than the district school you came from. So it was like a two-pronged complaint. You're not renewing charter schools, or you're renewing them based on race. And the other part was you're not approving new charter applications.
Now, I kind of need to jump into the part where it talks about race, because that has been bugging me for months. You have because a lot of the charter operators that were saying that this was an unfair process were Black charter operators, and they were saying that it was based on race. And the thing is, I've seen your test scores, and I've been in your schools, and I don't know. I mean, I covered the Ku Klux Klan for 2.5 years, so I kind of know what really good racism looks like. But the thing is, if we are going completely by what the charter school law says, in terms of you being able to stay open as an institution, this is the law that you all had, like Congressman Dwight Evans and State Senator Anthony Williams and John Purcell. This is the law that you had everybody put their pointy heads together and create. They are just following your law. It's just the thing that got me about it was you're sitting there and you're saying, I mean, the council people in particular, you could tell who had a conversation with one of the charter school lobbyists and who hadn't.
Right.
Based on some of the questions, based on the tone of the questions, based on the tenor of the questions. And there were things that, let's just say there were council people that I didn't think were as married to charter schools as they turned out to be. Like Councilman Curtis Jones was a complete surprise to me.
Oh, I wasn't surprised.
And he was, well, because I never tied him to education or charter schools in that way. Now, Councilman Isaiah Thomas, I knew he was kind of, big into charters because he used to teach at one. And I asked him, because one of the things that Mayor Parker has said in her budget that, she even said it on the campaign trail, I don't want there to be an us versus them in terms of charter schools and traditional publics. Yet, if we saw nothing else Friday, we saw that there was indeed an us versus them. So I asked Councilman Thomas about it afterward, and I said, you can't say that you may say there wasn't an us versus them, but that's not how it came out in this meeting. How do you respond to that? He's like, well, if it's an us versus them, well, what side am I on? And I'm like, well, that's a decision you need to make. But that is how, if I'm just looking at this hearing and I'm listening to the questioning and I'm listening to how it's presented and I'm listening to the fact that Reginald Streeter basically showed the most leadership I've seen anyone show in council in a very long time, because he decided that he was going to take the hit from all of these people, that he wasn't going to have his fellow council people, that he was going to take the hit, know. So
let me, I mean, you raised so many points. I don't want to lose track of them. And I think you really make a good point that the behavior of some council members in that session was really disturbing. I thought that Curtis Jones was disrespectful and kind of like talking to the board in this like finger wagging kind of way, and then telling them, he was going to assign them homework. Isaiah Thomas's behavior, in my opinion, was very inappropriate. He raised his voice. He berated them. He told President Streeter when, as you said, when a question was asked and he was trying to as the board president, I mean, Thomas just yelled at him. I told you I didn't want to hear from you. That is, that's not appropriate behavior from one human being to another, but an elected official to another public servant, way out of line. But I think I can give you some insight on the issue that you raised, Denise, before that, about where is the racism, and if you're not performing according to the framework, what's your beef? What the Black charter operators are saying, and this is what they're saying, that when you take charter school and you look at the number of charters operated by white people and the number of charters operated by Black people, there are more, and they're getting the same academic scores. The board has shut down more Black operated charter schools. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it may be. And here's something that people need to understand is there is some truth to that. And about 10 years ago, I was in a session in city council. I don't remember it was about charter schools per se, but there were charter representatives there. One of them was Larry Jones, who now represents the African American Charter Association here in Philly. He's the CEO of Richard Allen Charter School. And also Walter D. Palmer, who was a charter operator until he closed his two schools down. But what they were saying in that session was it's more difficult for standalone charter schools, like the charter schools that they were operating, they're one charter school. It's much more difficult because the big chains like the Universal, the Mastery, Paradigm, have a better fundraising mechanism. Mm-hmm. And that is true. That is how the system is working to an extent. When you keep that in mind, that the previous director of charter schools office said a few years ago, when somebody asked about this subject, she said to, I believe it was even the SRC at the time, rarely does the charter school office recommend non-renewal only based on academic standards. It's almost always because of a charter school may be in financial distress. So it may be true that when you look side by side and you just say, okay, here's how many on this side and here's how many on the other side. But that's not because of academic standards. As I said, the board renewed charter schools that fail to meet standards all the time. Usually when you look at who's going into non-renewal, it's schools that may be facing imminent financial collapse. So that's the system in the way that has been for a long time.
Well, maybe they need to get better accountants. I don't know what to do here, but
no, it's not the accountants, it's the fundraising. And that is a really complex subject, but we talked before about the charter CEOs and administration and how much some of the charter CEO make. When you have a school that has a principal and a vice principal and a dean and a full administration, the question then is, what does a charter CEO do? And a lot of what charter CEOs do is fundraising and political networking. Because it's clear to many observers, including the members of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, that what may have started as a desire to create a better educational system, if you accept that, has really become a very well-funded, well-organized patronage system. Public schools don't have PR people. They don't have lobbyists. We saw, I don't know all of them, but I saw 3 people in that council session on Friday that I recognize as paid charter lobbyists. So we're paying people to hire people to work to divert money from public schools.
And see, Another thing that when they were talking about fairness, I was like, okay, I still remember sitting in those meetings in 2013 and 2014 when the hedge fund corporation came down and said, we need to close some schools. And you had parents come in with picket signs and with their children saying, my zip code shouldn't determine my
Right.
education. Please keep my school open. My kids like their teachers. Everybody gets along. My school is a good school. Please don't close it. And those pleas fell on deaf ears. And there was no right to appeal. There was no due process allotted. There was none of that. And I'm like, how can you sit there and say that people are being unfair to you when, in order for me to close a charter school, and if you go on the Department of Education's website, you will see this, there is a whole section devoted to closing charter schools, and it is a process. It is a process that in some cases can take as long as 2 years for you to get through. Yet you were
I would say more. Having attended some of them, if you take, I would say if it's 2 years, then the charter school has said, okay, we're just going to stop.
Mhm.
But the ones who go all the way would go through a whole extensive and very expensive, which the district pays for the whole thing, process, boxes and boxes, reams of paper and documents, stenographer, hearing examiner, and that takes weeks. And then the hearing examiner report, and then the board hears that report and votes. Then the charter school can go to the state charter appeal board. If they don't like that, they can go to court and they can go to the Supreme Court. This could take a very, very long time, which the taxpayers pay for. But your point is very well taken, because I was at all of those meetings, and kids just stood there and cried and begged, please don't close my school. And
they did it anyway. And now, according to some data I've gotten since for a piece I'm working on, we're finding that the neighborhoods that were impacted by those school closings are where some of the worst incidents of gun violence in the city is.
Yeah.
The city is coming from, because basically when you rip a school out of a neighborhood, you rip a heart out of a neighborhood.
correct.
You're messing with
Yeah.
the economy. You've messed with the neighborhood itself. You've turned it into something. The neighborhood that used to be cohesive and used to coalesce around this
Right.
school
Right.
no longer exists.
That's just really such a good point. Also, most of the charter schools in the city, with the exception of those Renaissance charters, and I think there's about 20 of those. So there's 55 or 60 charter schools that are citywide. So, as you're saying, a school's just not a school. It's an anchor in a community. And when you can live here and go to your neighborhood school, and your neighbor's child goes to a school that's not anywhere near your neighborhood, you're not as united a community around that school, because you can live in West Philly and your child can go to a charter school in South Philly. You can live in Southwest Philly and go all the way up to, Mast on Byberry Road. So it's in many, many ways, not just the closing of those public schools, but the expansion of the charters has really, I would say, like, diluted the power of the community to advocate for their schools. Yeah.
All right. Well, Lisa, where can people find out more about the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools?
We are a grassroots organization, and we have a website. If you look up, Philly Apps Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and we're in person. And there's a school board meeting tomorrow. Of course, we will be there. So wherever there's like a hearing in city council or at the board, there's always apps members there. But We don't know what's going to happen. In terms of Joyce Wilkerson, I don't think that there was anything other than naked power play. Because Joyce Wilkerson's been like very fiscally responsible. It was really, to me, just a very naked power play. They wanted to separate somebody from the pack, put their head on a pike and, say we're being treated very unfairly and somebody's going to have to pay.
Now, from what I understand, because I also talked to Councilman Thomas about that because he's the head of the education committee. I said,
Right.
what is, because after the hearing that doesn't end finally ended, Reginald Streeter and the other nominees, including Joyce Wilkerson, had like a brief press avail. And, they basically, Streeter basically said, we're going to go with the mayor's vision. The mayor wanted all 9 of us. This is what we're going to do. And even when I talked to Mayor Parker's communications director, Joe Grace, afterward, he said, the mayor appointed these people. This is who she wants. And she's, going to work to get them. And I talked to Councilman Thomas afterward, and he said that right now there were still negotiations going on. But what people need to understand is that 2 council members who probably would have been advocates for Joyce Wilkerson were not present at the meeting. Right. Kendra Brooks and Jamie Gaudier were overseas. They were in Germany learning about affordable housing and transit and other things as part of a program that they went on. And I was at a election day luncheon that I go to every election day at South Restaurant off of Spring Garden Street, and Councilmember Brooks was talking about people were blowing up her phone while she was overseas, giving her the blow-by-blow of what was going on in this meeting. Right. So I don't think that this is the last we've heard of this, despite the fact that council is expected to vote on the other 8 nominees during this week's session. Right. So, Wilkerson isn't out of the, while Wilkerson has not been officially voted on, there's no guarantee that they're going to replace her with someone else.
And, nobody ever gave a reason, by the way. We're all just, you're talking about, you talked to a couple of the council members. We were not able to do that. APS members were trying in last week or two to get in to talk to council members. And we were told, we didn't get an appointment with anybody. We were told it's budget season, sorry, not enough time. And then we come to find out, that, as you said, you're in the halls and you're seeing, charter lobbyists in council members' office. That did not feel too good, but I want to just stress, nobody really knows, because nobody ever said why they pulled Wilkerson's name. So we're just, I talked to this one, I talked to that one, this might be going on. The council president made an announcement that Wilkerson's name would be withdrawn. There was no motion, there was no seconding, there was no discussion. Just happened.
Well, the resolution for her wasn't even introduced.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they just separated hers and that was it. And nobody gave a reason. Now that is going to be tricky too, because, as we were discussing before, that hearing that we attended on Friday wasn't actually adjourned. It was recessed. And I mean, I'm hoping they don't do this, but technically, legally, if they're just going to reconvene that meeting that wasn't adjourned, I don't think they have to give public notice.
No, I don't believe they do.
Yeah. So it's like, just keeps adding insult to injury in terms of, what APS always tries to do is say, we want to be part of this process. We want to make sure the people who are affected by this can get in there and have something to say. And it would just kind of be the icing on the cake if, people come down and they wait to testify and then they're given a lousy minute and a half. And then, they wake up and hear like, wait, there's another hearing. Nobody announced that. But that could happen. Yeah. I mean, that could happen. But as I said in council and in my commentary, people who watched that or attended that got a pretty stark lesson in what dark money can buy.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, one of the main casualty of that whole dark money expenditure was the truth.
Well, that usually is the main casualty.
Yeah.
You're so right, Denise.
All right. Well, Lisa Haver, thank you so much for joining us, and we're gonna
Thank
have you
you.
back on real soon once we know where we're headed with this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much. That's Lisa Haver of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, and she contributes to Hall Monitor about once a month or so about education issues. So we're glad to have her with us. So Denise, let's shift gears a little bit. Yesterday was a big day across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and here in the city of Philadelphia. We had an election, although you wouldn't know it by the turnout.
And you wouldn't even, to tell you how underplayed this primary election was, I've been covering politics for a lot of years, and someone had to remind me last week that we had a primary. That is how low key this was. And there were a couple of factors that led to that. One, the fact that the presidential nominees, Donald Trump for the Republicans and Joe Biden for the Democrats, have pretty much been settled. You know, everybody who was competing against them is either dropped out or gone independent. So, they didn't really have any so you couldn't even talk that up.
And I'm glad you brought that up first, because that's where I wanted to start. Ordinarily, we wouldn't get into presidential politics too much, at least at this point, but something very odd happened that sticks out to me. So, like you said, Donald Trump is the Republican nominee.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else has dropped out. However, Nikki Haley was still on the Pennsylvania ballot.
Mm-hmm.
She got over 16% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
Against the perceived nominee. Joe Biden also had a challenger. Biden got 93% of the vote. So I think if you're Biden, you're fine with that. That's a protest vote against Biden, right?
Mm-hmm.
That and the people who wrote in uncommitted. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
Trump, on the other hand, doesn't have the same kind of political baggage right now, but his own party, 16.5% of them vote against him. Is that a harbinger of problems he could have in the fall with his own party?
Well, you always had a core group of what were called never Trumpers, people who, even though they saw the Trump train coming, they didn't want to get on. And during the 2016 Republican National Convention, they tried to mount a challenge to him. They tried to get they tried to peel off his delegates and say, hey, look, just because your state said that they wanted this guy doesn't mean you have to vote for him. If you vote for him, the chances of us not winning are really, really good. So how about if you switch your vote to somebody who isn't as repugnant? And those people were basically, they didn't get on the Trump train, but they did get mowed down by it.
Mm-hmm.
The most notable at the time was Ted Cruz. And I still remember being in the stadium in Cleveland for the Republican National Convention when he got on stage and did his Vote Your Conscience speech. They had to literally have security take him out because the people who were there and who were, on fire for Trump, in some cases frothing at the mouth, were not happy with him for that. So what you're seeing there is a bit of a protest vote in Pennsylvania, which could be significant because Pennsylvania is a swing state,
Mm-hmm.
but it is not enough. It's probably a group of people that wouldn't have voted for Trump under any circumstances. It's no guarantee that they're going to switch their allegiance to Biden, or they're not going to, vote third party, or they're not going to, or what usually happens with Republicans as opposed to Democrats. The saying is Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. Because in November, even all the never Trumpers that went to the Republican National Convention and said, no, we don't want this clown as our nominee, they ended up voting for him in the end. Because in the end, it's about power and party, as opposed to, I really don't like this guy. And those who really felt they couldn't hold their noses and pull the lever, they just stayed home. It's probably going to be the same this year, where you have all of those Republicans, despite the fact that they find so much about Donald Trump absolutely distasteful, they're going to vote for him, because while they don't like him, they can't see themselves voting for a Democrat, because while the Democrats are not as progressive as progressives would like them to be, they're still too progressive for Republicans. Mm-hmm. Now, who that could hurt is Dave McCormick. Mm-hmm. And Dave McCormick is the nominee for Senate on the Republican Party side here in Pennsylvania. He's fighting it. He's competing against Bob Casey, who is the incumbent and a Democrat. And what's kind of cracking me up with that is that McCormick is trying to paint Casey as a slow, do nothing, plotting, boring kind of senator, and that, you know, Pennsylvania needs something refreshing. And the thing is, I've sat and I listened to his ads and I said, do you know how many people have tried to take Bob Casey out by saying he's boring? More than we want to count. The problem that the Republicans are going to have with Bob Casey is that Casey is just enough like them, particularly in the western part of the state, to be palatable. I mean, anybody who considers themselves pro-life is going to remember that the Supreme Court decision that led us down the slippery slope that became the abolition of Roe v. Wade was Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. That was Bob Casey's dad, former Governor Bob Casey. So, you know, Casey's got the pro-birth bona fides, or enough of them, to have those folks be a part of his tribe. And he's done enough for folks in the southeastern part of the state, which, if people need to remember that as southeastern Pennsylvania goes, so goes the state, because where all the people are. Mm-hmm. That's the most populated part. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see, you know, Dave McCormick try to paint Bob Casey as this boring, plotting senator that doesn't do anything. And it's going to be interesting to see Donald Trump come to places like in upstate Pennsylvania, talking about, you know, Sleepy Bob and Sleepy Joe and everything. Of course, people will show pictures of him falling asleep in court, but, you know, that's another thing altogether. But it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this. Some of the, like I said, some of the Nikki Haley people may decide, you know something, I'm going to have to vote for Trump because I can't see myself voting for Biden. But that doesn't mean I have to vote for Dave McCormick. Right. I have to vote for Trump light. I can vote for Bob Casey because he's been my senator for years. He's done what I needed him to do. And sure, he's boring, but he's my kind of boring.
Right. So moving down the line, state attorney general, this in a way was almost predictable. You had 5 candidates, 4 of which were from the eastern part of the state, and you had 1 from the western part of the state. Right. Eugene DePasquale wins the race because, you know, you can look at the numbers and say the other candidates hurt each other where they're from. Right. So I'm not too surprised by that result. Were you?
No, I'm not. And I wasn't surprised for a couple of reasons. One, you're right. The four candidates from southeastern Pennsylvania, Jared Solomon, Jack Stolheimer, Keir Bradford Gray, and Joe Kahn, they kind of cannibalized each other a little bit by, we may be the most populous part of the state, but, you split us four ways. The most populous part of the state was split four ways. So the rest of the state kind of made this decision. And the rest of the state was Eugene D. Pasquale.
Yeah.
And when you added the fact that he's a former auditor general, and while he was auditor general, he made a name for himself with a couple of the audits he did. He kind of put himself in a position where he could pull off what basically folks thought was the upset.
Mm-hmm. And, when you look at the numbers, that's kind of what happened, Speaking of Auditor General, Malcolm Kenyatta from Philadelphia won handily. I thought he would win. I didn't know that the numbers were going to be that far in his favor. Almost 65% of the vote.
Now, what's going to be interesting about the Auditor General's race is it's basically two Black guys.
Mm-hmm.
And under normal circumstances, in any other part of the country, that probably wouldn't be a big deal. But in places like Pennsylvania, who rarely, if ever, elect people of color or women statewide, this is going to be an interesting race, because when Timothy Ford became the Auditor General, probably the only reason he became the Auditor General is because he was a Black man running against an Asian woman, current council member Nina Ahmad. In this case, you've got Malcolm Kenyatta, who was one of two openly gay members of the Pennsylvania legislature. And you have Ford, who was an incumbent and, a Republican, and he's Black. Now, where there might be a historical thing that goes on here with Malcolm Kenyatta becoming the first openly gay member, openly gay row house holder in Pennsylvania, that might happen. But the thing is, Kenyatta has, when Biden ran for president in 2016 and also in 2020, especially in 2020, Kenyatta was one of his surrogates, and he literally went all over the state.
Mm-hmm.
Because at one time, remember, he was running for the nomination for Senate for the seat that eventually went to John Fetterman. He was already going around the state, campaigning, getting to know people, showing people in places that wouldn't know a Black gay man from a tire iron that I am a Black gay man, and I look just as normal as any other Black person you know. So look past my being Black and my being gay and see that I am competent and I am here to talk to you. So that might benefit him. Not many people can tell me what Timothy Ford has done as Auditor General. But then again, the Auditor General is one of those offices that you kind of have to be made to pay attention to in the first place, despite the fact that it holds a very important function, which is making sure that the state is spending its money the way it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to be an interesting race to watch. And it's going to be interesting, one, because you have two people of color in it. Two, because you have a gay man as one of those people of color. And three, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Malcolm Kenyatta if he loses this race. I mean, he also simultaneously ran for his seat in the state house. So it's not like he's going to be unemployed if he loses his race. But every election cycle, he is run for something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of have the same issue with him as I do with Anthony Williams when it comes to his state Senate seat. If you don't want to be there anymore, don't be there. Say you're quitting. Give this, let two other people run for the seat. go on about your life. And if you want to run for something else, then do that. But I'm not sure how fair it is to the people who are represented by either of these two men, to know that at any point in time they could decide, I don't want to represent you in this particular office anymore. I want to represent you here, and then you're going to have to find new representation in that office.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's going to be interesting to see, who wins that race, and it's also going to be interesting to see if Malcolm Kenyatta decides to run for something else, or if he just decides he's going to be the state house rep in his state house seat, which also includes Temple University as representation. Whether he's going to do that for a while and then maybe run for something else later.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be interesting to see. And I also am wondering, is Joe Biden going to come and campaign for him? I mean, he campaigned for Joe in 2020, return the favor.
Yeah. And just real quick, state treasurer, there was an upset. Larry McGlynn beat Ryan Bizzarro, who was the endorsed candidate from the Democratic Party. So interesting slate for this election, this upcoming election. So let's talk local, Denise. And I think I know where we're going to start.
Oh, there's no other place we can start, Larry.
So in the 10th State House District, right now, it's about 50 votes separating incumbent Ammon Brown and challenger Cass Green. Saj Blackwell is far behind at this point. So it's going to be either Brown or Green.
Right.
And we're going to know more when we see the mail-in ballots.
Right.
So mail-in ballots throughout the city were about a third of all ballots cast. So if that holds up in that district, we really, it could change. So,
you and I have sat through a couple of election court hearings in terms of Ammon Brown and whether or not he should remain on the ballot, because despite being an incumbent, you can't get the basics right, like turning in your campaign finance reports on time, or making sure that Mickey Mouse is not one of the names on your petition.
That all the petitions aren't in the same handwriting.
Right. And this year and this week and yesterday, because let's face it, when you've done stuff like, mess up your campaign finance reports or mess up your petitions, you got to do something new to make people say, why is this person keep getting elected? He was caught electioneering, campaigning illegally near voting booths. And I'm like, tell me again why how did you become the incumbent? Why are you, if you're the incumbent, why is it that you keep having the same problem every year or every 2 years with the same thing? You would think that as the incumbent, you would have that straightened out by now.
The first thing they teach you when you're like a committee person or learning how to do electioneering, you don't stand inside the polling place.
No, you don't.
You got to be at least 10 feet away. I can't understand how these rules keep getting misinterpreted, is I guess the nice way I'll say it. It's really surprising, which I think shows you why there are two challenges for that seat.
Right. And in fact, Cass Green and Ammon Brown is a rematch from the last election cycle. She almost won that, but he ended up winning, because it's really hard to unseat an incumbent in Pennsylvania. But if there's only 50 votes between the two of them, it could happen this time around. Now, Sasha Blackwell was also in that race 2 years ago, and she obviously didn't fare any better than she did 2 years ago, but she had the endorsement of the Philadelphia Inquirer, because basically the Inquirer's attitude was, we don't care for Almond Brown, and Green is too progressive, so we're going to go with Blackwell. And the fact that she wasn't able to crack any higher than third kind of tells you that the strength of the Blackwell political machine isn't what it used to be, because once upon a time, the sheer fact of her last name being Blackwell would have been all she needed for that district. And that's not the case anymore. And I think that on some level, when Jamie Gaudier beat Jamie Blackwell for her seat 4 years ago, that's kind of when you started to see the wheels come off a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And something else that we've been covering a lot here, that I want to mention, I think is really important, is the ballot question passed.
Mm-hmm. It passed.
Yep. And it passed well, 66.5% of the vote. 116,000 people voted for it. Almost 59,000 voted against it. Mm-hmm. This ballot question, I think, was really important because it indemnifies the RCOs, the community groups, which what it really does, in my opinion, is it protects them from these slap lawsuits, mm-hmm. meant to drive them out of existence by frequent lawsuits, some frivolous lawsuits, to the point where they can't defend themselves any longer. Mm-hmm. And then a developer can knock them out and doesn't have to worry about them anymore in the zoning process. Mm-hmm. And just general complaints about something they're trying to do. So this is a good thing for Philadelphians, and I think a good thing for like democracy here in the city.
Well, what's going to be interesting, because the whole reason why this was necessary in the first place was because you had community groups that were protesting a lot of the gentrification that was going on here in Philadelphia. And now, and a lot of them were being like beaten into submission because the developers that were trying to do the gentrification have very deep pockets and money to burn. Mm-hmm. And now, since the city says you have to be a certified organization for us to consider you legitimate, now the city, has said, now, basically what this says is, okay, if we have to go through you to be legitimate, you've got to pick up the freight for our legal bills when these people come at us, because developers are not going to stop, suing community groups over projects they're trying to do that community groups are giving them resistance on. But what this says to the city is, okay, if you want to say that we have to be a legitimate organization in your eyes to be a part of the process, you got to give up some money. And now the city has got to give up some money. Now, what's going to be interesting is to see if this gets appealed or not, if this ends up in court, because you had people who felt that this shouldn't go through because, the city doesn't have the money to do this kind of thing. Well, I guess we're going to find out.
Yep. So we're going to have to leave it there. Next week, we're going to talk more budget. We haven't finalized our guests yet. We're trying to figure that out. So we'll let you know about that on social media, either this week or next week. We're trying to get multiple things going. So we'll let you know about that. But thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.